Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. Seattle Public Schools has amended certain student information policies after a parent complained to administrators that an identity worksheet handed out by an outspoken teacher may have violated federal and state laws. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, what were the parents' concerns and what was the situation that led them to speak up?
Yeah, so this was from a parent of a student who goes to Chief South International High School in the Seattle Public School District. And essentially, as a beginning of the school year activity last year, so September 2023, I believe. Yeah, September 2023, there was in one ethnic studies class, a world history ethnic studies class, there was a worksheet called a social identity wheel handout. So social identity wheels, if you're not familiar, are sort of a way to map your different characteristics. And sometimes these look like charting your privilege and your oppression. These are something that I think have been around for a little while, and they have a lot of probably the most play in ethnic studies courses and those kinds of things. That's where you are most likely to see them in states like Washington or California. That's where I've seen those most likely come into things. And Seattle Public Schools, they actually sent out like a Black Lives Matter at School slide deck to school districts in February, I think this year, where they recommended that social identity wheels were part of that curriculum and trying to ask students to chart like their privilege and oppression. So that's kind of what this comes down to. And basically the parent said, look, my student was told to fill out this social identity wheel handout, fill it out completely, and then save it with your name attached to it. And the handout specifically asks for things like mental or physical health, psychological or political affiliations, sex behavior and attitudes, like their economic status, gender and sexual orientation, those kinds of things, race, ethnicity, religion. So those kinds of things were on the handout there.
And those specific characteristics are protected under student privacy laws, both at a state and federal level, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of what got under the parents' skin, and that's what she was complaining about, is essentially that this would violate the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. And I think I might have misspoke a little bit there earlier. The assignment required students to describe their race, ethnicity, religion, physical and mental ability, economic status, gender, sexual orientation, and some other characteristics as well. But that PPRA does not allow schools that receive federal funds to ask about a lot of those different kinds of things, specifically mental health, psychological problems, political affiliations, sex behavior and attitudes, which would include gender identity and sexual orientation, illegal or incriminating behavior, which the wheel handout didn't really ask about. Religious practices, though, affiliations and beliefs, and then income. So those are things that were definitely covered in that handout, right? And so those are protected by that Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. And that law spells out that schools cannot ask about that in a survey or analysis without the prior written consent of a parent. So you can't go out and ask your students those kinds of things without parental consent. And so that's what the parent said, is that the school had violated the PPRA because they did not ask for, their permission to, ask these questions of her student.
And you submitted a public records request and got some emails related to this. So through that, you kind of saw not only the school's response to her, but also kind of their internal conversation. What was that conversation? What was that response that they gave to these concerns?
Yeah, really, they kind of came up with a way to talk about, like, how do we respond to the parent without really discussing the PPRA. So that was like the default reaction was, how do we sort of try to make this right, but also we don't admit any kind of fault. And that was pretty clear in some of the communications there. The regional executive director of schools, Christopher Carter, he told the assistant superintendent, Mike Sorosky, about, here's what we think we should do. And essentially said that we should get the teacher and the principal to meet and review the syllabus, reference this curriculum map, reference the state's ethnic studies framework and referenced a world history textbook, and then kind of added, well, I don't think the teacher even uses that, but we should, sort of bring it up. And that seemed like it was kind of a way to like talk about this in context with like what the school's trying to do without admitting anything related to the PPRA, and basically said that the principal would share our interpretation of the law, which will be consistent with our legal counsel. So they're basically saying we have like an idea of the PPRA, and so we'll share that as well, but not admitting any kind of fault, and really trying to deflect toward like, here's what the state says, and that we really believe, and the school district still maintains that social identity wheels are a good thing for students to use.
But they have adjusted their policy some now, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So they confirmed with me that they no longer allow teachers to get students' names attached to that, or to have students turn in their work. They're allowed to do these social identity wheel handouts, but they're not allowed to turn that information in, because when they do, they're giving that to the school. And so that would potentially violate the PPRA. So the school told me in a statement, we're no longer allowing teachers to do that. They've amended their policy. And so that wasn't really part of the original response to parents, but because of that parental complaint, because of, the reporting on this and asking the questions, they've said, like, we're not going to allow teachers to do that anymore.
And the parent who originally had this complaint still has some concerns.
Yeah, some of the concerns are, if you're in a classroom full of kids and you're still writing down some of this stuff about your personal characteristics or your identity, then, there could be problems. Like, what if you're writing down something, about your religion, and then a student who's sitting just a few feet away from you on a different desk sees what you're writing and then starts teasing you for it, or, you kind of have to think worst case scenario here, or you drop your paper, somebody else picks it up, somebody else finds it, and then they discover something, an invisible characteristic about you that you weren't ready to share with them, but you felt like you had to because it was part of your class, your handout that you had to get done. So it's one of those questions of how does that play out in the real world, maybe, but that's something that the school district says is worth the risk, right? They've said we still believe that this is a valid and a good thing for students to do.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.